guys want to do introductions beforehand, or?
Oh, whatever. We'll
I'll just
just
introduce the
start
start
of
of
the
the
speech.
speech.
Whatever.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Bobby Mehta. I'm going to be the first and third speaker on the affirmative from Washington. Yeah, for PYs, feel free to call them verbally. If there's no other questions, then first or second. Okay. If there's no other questions, then I'll begin on my next one. My partner and I are proud to affirm the resolution that this House would give biological children of sperm donors and egg donors the legal right to know the donor's identity. The plan of the affirmative is going to be that once, we want to specify some things. We think that this legal right should only be given once they turn 18. This is just logical because this is the model that most other countries that prevent anonymous sperm and egg donation do follow. So it's in the status quo. This House we just stand for it as a country where anonymity is not banned. And yeah, we think the weighing mechanism for this round should be benefits to the child for two different reasons. One, they're the ones who are actively going out to figure out whether or what the identity of their donor was, and two, we think that children are our future, so we need to focus on them more than adults. And then some more framing points. First, we see that the person the child that goes out, they know first of all that they were conceived from an egg or sperm donor beforehand. This isn't oh, you're telling them, oh, actually your mom and your dad, the people who raised you are not the people who were in the process of conceiving you. Second, the only people, it's only for children who actively want to know. Not every single child will be given the identity of their donor. It's people who actively reach out and want to go. And third, the legal right, this legal right that's established is only for people who donate in the future, not people who previously anonymously donated. So this legal right will apply to children that were birthed through their donations. Moving on to our first contention, which is going to be on.
I'm going to stop time real quick.
Yeah, for sure.
My pen just stopped working.
Oh, do you need?
Can I borrow?
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
No, good.
This pen is tired of floating too much. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah.
Let me know when you're good to go. Okay. I'm at 123. I'll begin. Our first contention is going to be on children's rights. We tell you that people have the fundamental right to know where they come from. Denying it leads to deep psychological stress, and knowing gives them a stable sense of self. Well, let's talk about how. The first point here is going to be that studies show that donor conceived individuals feel incomplete, alienated, or confused by identity. Second is going to be the Article 7 in the UN Convention gives the right to people to know one's parents, and we think this is something that should be unilaterally enforced across different countries. Three, we think that anonymity privileges are only for the donor's comfort, and values the donor's comfort over the child's lifelong experience. We see that this creates a power imbalance where the child has no autonomy. Subpoint A is going to be the donor consented to donating knowing that a child would be created. While the child did not consent to being brought into the world, they did not consent to being brought into a world where they didn't know the identity of the person who helped create them. Subpoint B is going to be that our children are our future. You can just extend the framework point here. We can't create a power imbalance between the future generation and the younger generation. C, we think that even in the status quo, even adopted children have the right to know who their parent is, and we think that same logic and rhetoric should apply to people who are conceived out of sperm and egg donors. The fourth point under this contention is going to be precedent. We see multiple other countries like the United Kingdom, Sweden, Norway, and Germany have laws like this in place, where donors find where children are able to find out the identity of their donor once they're 18. Subpoint B, this helps improve record keeping, reduce accidental incest, and it also creates a more open family environment in general. C, the point of this precedent is just that it's a successful model. We don't see donor rates dropping. I can get more into that in our future speeches on statistics, but we don't see donor rates stopping. We see children feeling happier, and overall there's just not a lot of backlash. So the underview on this contention is just going to be it's giving children the right to know where they come from, and once they're able to find out who they're.
This is just all under your ad one.
Yeah. Okay. The underview over here is just the children are able to know where they come from and who their donors are, and it just gives them a complete sense of self, which again we see that most people who are conceived through sperm or egg donations do feel incomplete. Our second condition is going to be on medical history, which is super important. The first uniqueness here is that in the U.S. a sperm donor unknowingly, one example is a sperm donor unknowingly passed on a deadly heart genetics effect to 9 out of 24 offspring born from his sperm, one of whom literally died at age 2 from heart failure. When he had donated, he had no symptoms with family history. The second uniqueness is going to be that around 10% of oocyte or egg donors egg donors run the risk of carrying an unrecognized autosomal diseases. Secondly, in much of the U.S., donors are not obliged to disclose potentially inheritable conditions in over 40 states right now. Obviously, testing happens, but a lot of time neurological issues can pass this and impact children. So what exactly is the significance of this contention? Well, let's talk about the links. The first link here is going to be that when children have the right to know who their parent is, they're able to identify medical problems that might come to them in the future. Oftentimes, when we are growing up, a lot of medical problems that might run through our family, we're not unsure if it's going to affect us, come to us when we are much older, and a lot of time that might come after a donor has made a sperm or egg donation. What happens happens then is that they're not able to identify that medical problem as something like when they are like donating their sperm or egg, and then like child never like is not able to take things that are like preventative for that. Like like that family might run a risk of heart disease or a risk of diabetes, and like there are things that you can do to make sure to like reduce your risk of getting those in the future. But if the child is unable to find out those things, then they're not going to be able to take preventative measures, which lowers the quality of life and increases their chances of death as well. The second thing here is going to be like knowing medical history is like not just good for like disease, like things that they might carry in the future, but also it like helps just like identify medical conditions in the family, which again has the same impacts of like helping them make sure to improve their quality of life and improve their health overall. I don't really have anything to say, so I'm gonna end my speech at 5 minutes. Thank you, and vote aye.
All case observation, 2 disadvantages, and then the half in order. Sorry, I didn't ask about them. Okay.
Wait, sorry, you should repeat that.
Yeah, just top case observation, some stuff on the framing, 2 disadvantages, and then the advantages as they were back. Yeah, which, okay.
Sorry, isn't that a child?
1 second.
Huh?
Isn't that
Okay, yeah. Time begins in 3, 2, 1. Side opposition supports a world where people can choose to help others create life without surrendering their autonomy or privacy. Side government wants to mandate lifelong openness from people who never intended to be parents. This destroys the system that makes donation possible in the first place. When we look at this debate round, we see a couple of things. First off, some fertility clinics currently offer open ID or identity release options where donors can actually share their information to future people. Why is this important? This means that this solves for any donors right now who actually want their information to be shared. For instance, if I do have a medical condition, I can then share my information via open release so that then my kid, whatever offspring that it happens as a result of my donation, can then see it. This is something that is a common practice around many fertility clinics in the United States. Additionally, we said that like there's current bills in Colorado and it's increasing in SQO, so you have a 100% understanding of solvency within the SQO. Then let's look at the top of case here. They talk about net benefits to the child. A couple of problems here. Yes, children are the future. However, what that doesn't do is mean that it just doesn't look at the people needed to create the child. We tell you that because there are parents involved in that process in order to create the children, they also have rights that desperately need to be considered. This is also a very slippery slope rhetoric. If we prioritize children in every circumstance, say they're the future, then why is it not that we restructure society totally in that favor? Well, because it's illogical to give the people who don't have developed brains that are fully developed the actual top priority.
Respond to the fact that even though they're actively getting out and trying to get information, doesn't give them the right to do that if the donor doesn't.
Even if they're trying to actively get information, doesn't mean that we can then just bypass the donor's privacy and their need to not release information. Just because you're younger does not mean that you have a right to be able to see other people's medical information, medical history. Then let's yeah.
So once this legal right is given, won't any donor that's trying to donate their sperm or egg know and donate with the knowledge that the child can find out their identity at
Correct.
the age of 18?
It means the donor supply goes down.
Yes, again, and we're going to explain how this donor supply goes down, which is exactly the disadvantage 1, which is donor collapse. The thesis of this is that anonymity is the backbone of the fertility system. Disclosure destroys it. The uniqueness of the donor supply is stable now. Number 1 is stable participation. As of 2024, the United States has over 30,000 sperm donors and 10,000 egg donors annually. This donor base supports nearly all demands. 70,000 children born in this way just per year. Without anonymity, supply in the United States is no longer maintained. The second point is queer and infertile family access. 63% of LGBTQ couples and 1 in 8 heterosexual couples in the United States rely on assisted reproductive tech, also known as ART. The third point here is that the evidence proves. After the United Kingdom banned donor anonymity in 2005, donor participation drops by nearly half in just 2 years, the most common reason being privacy. The links to this is the affirmative causes systemic collapse. The first thing you can look at is exit incentives. A 2021 Harvard study found that in the United States, nearly 89.3% of donors remained anonymous given the choice. The second thing here is legal liability. Donors fear retroactive claims, emotional pressure, and financial burdens. Even if legally protected social pressures from offspring drives deterrence. Fear of being, tracked down leads to withdrawal from donations. The third point is breaks medical consent. The rule of law should never be on child but on the donor. People no longer trust the government to keep their data safe. We think that this policy will just lead to increasing mistrust. The fourth point is clinic shutdowns. In the Netherlands, 3 major donor banks closed down after identity rules passed that they had to repeal it. This proves our point further. The fifth point is that of cross-border. I'm sorry, I have a lot to get through. The fifth point here is cross-border reproductive tourism. Mandates push people to unregulated foreign markets such as Georgia, where
Their consent protections
where
are
the
weaker.
consent protections are weaker. This increases the risk of exploitation of people. The impacts are twofold. First off, massive fertility. Without donors, tens of thousands are denied the ability to have children, which means there's no meaning to life and it outweighs to death itself. The second off is dehumanization. LGBTQIA plus families feel incomplete and otherized as they're no longer able to have this mechanism to have children. The disadvantage number two is that of family disruption and psychological harm. Family destruction and psychological harm. Opening the door does more harm than good. The uniqueness is that right now we have the most our donor base is extremely stable and we have clarity.
No, just clarify the uniqueness is the U.S. where it's
This is like the U.S. that we are looking at inherently. The first point here is families are currently built on like a transparent social agreements. Most donors conceive children are raised with clear expectations. The donor is not a parent, and the family is built on love. Then the second point here is psychologists and fertility experts support on anonymity. Organizations like the American Society for Reproductive Medicine note that stable identity formations are more tied to security than preventing genetic knowledge-based information. The third point is SCRO avoids forced emotional collisions. While an identity disclosure is optimal, families can choose to disclose or not. There's no systematic disruption to emotional structures. The links here are multi. Number one, mandatory disclosures overrides family intent. Families who never planned for contact are now forced into complex emotional situations. The second point is shifts the child's perception of their real parents. Knowing the donor's identity can cause children to change course on the legitimacy of their actual caregivers, especially during formative years. Even though they clarify that you actually already know your parent, it's still knowing the actual identity of the donor is what can be disruptive. The third thing is that it triggers emotional pressure and confusion. Even if a donor wants no contact, children may feel rejection or unresolved identity issues. This creates harm. This creates unconsensual reaching out from the donor children and can actually lead to increased mental health issues. The fourth point is exposes families to social stigmas. In communities of traditional or conservative communities, forced outings of donors' identity leads to shame, judgment, or other alienation. The fifth point here is that it turns private family stories into legal obligations. The impacts are: number one, there's an emotional breakdown in vulnerable households. Number two, it leads to identity instability. The mental health worsens. And the third is that there's a loss of privacy as now medical information turns to the state at a much higher rate. At the end of the day, this motion turns family, privacy, and identity to a government mandate. These are issues too personal to be legislated. Let's move to the affirmative case. The first thing they talk about is this idea of children's rights and how it leads to deep psychological stress. We tell you this only gets worse on side affirmative for a couple of reasons. First off, knowing the identity of your donor only expands these actual mistrust and this identity issues, and we tell you they were never actually able to get closure because the donor probably didn't want their information out there, and it's going to be unresponsive to any reaching out. They talk about these legal bypasses like the UN and stuff, yet they give you no mechanism as to why I care at all about what Article 7 says. They then talk about this idea that again, children are the future, and we tell you this is not any justification to be able to violate donors' rights. Then they talk about how this reduces accidental incest and stuff. I just do not believe that this is a massive thing that people deal with. They really could do that work for you if they feel like it. Then
also this is going to solve later, but hospitals provide critical medical data.
Yeah, you can talk about that. Okay, on the advantage number two, we talk about medical history. Again, we tell you that open release already solves for this. If you are somebody who has these types of issues, then you already solve for it. But also, if you have a condition and you go to the doctor, they are probably going to be able to give you what you need to be able to get, for you to get healthy. You don't need the identity or to know the first and last name of your donor in order to do that. By the, other information mechanisms already solved. This is already solved in school. They already deal with, medical complications like that. Also, because it's a long process, it's not just simple as what two people having a baby. Then we tell you that
they give an example of age 2, but age 18 is when their plan starts. Their example's irrelevant.
Yeah, they give the example of you being able to find out information about yourself at age 2 and being able to solve for it earlier. Yet they give the information at age 18, so they're never actually able to solve back for these harms. By the way, you're still experiencing the same amount of harms. On the net, this is probably non-unique. We tell you that these neurological issues, they talk about how over 10% of eye donors are at risk. By the fact that when you implement this, we tell you that many people actually don't support it. Worth the Cambridge thing?
Oh,
you can get to it.
Yeah.
On the net, Judge, we urge you to look at the fact that current mechanisms already solve this medical harm that they talk about, and how the current SQO already solves for those who want to actually have their information released. Thank you, and I urge a strong opposition ballot.
Okay, sorry. What do you want me to do? Okay. So the order of the speech is going to be an overview, the mediation.
Overview of egg. Okay.
Say that again?
Overview of egg.
Okay.
Alright, cool. That my time starts at 3, 2, 1. The only argument that my opponents have that is inherently offensive is that donor rates drop. Don't buy this argumentation of psychological harm. Because when someone goes into a place, they concede in a POI that only people who they concede in a POI that the only people who donate are those who go in knowing that their information will be released, which, as we can see, isn't going to be a problem. We'll get to the statistics issue when we hop onto the neg over there and tell you why historically across like multiple examples in places that have already legalized this has ended up not being a problem in the long run, not the short run. Okay, we'll get to that when we get to their case. Okay. We'd argue that when someone makes the choice to walk into a donor clinic, that is exactly what it is, a choice. But when a child comes into this world and they don't know of their parentage or any of that, that isn't a choice. They were brought into this world. They weren't given the choice, like wherever they were created, that, oh, do you want donor parentage? Do you want like parents who were already together when you were conceived, like biologically with the two of them? They don't get that choice. So we believe that the rights of the child in this grand thing are the ones that are getting neglected in the long run, which ends up being a bad thing for the reasons that we bring up. Okay, onto the topic case. The first thing that they bring up is that people can choose to help others without like giving up their autonomy, that these people never intended to be parents. 2 responses here. The first response is that once this legal right is in place, people who donate are able to know that their children will find out their identity. It will be like a law. Secondly, people who never intended to be parents. Yes, but when you donate your sperm or egg, even if you don't intend to be the parent of a child, you do intend to be the biological parent. You're under the assumption that your sperm and your egg will go somewhere to help with the conception of like some child out there. Like you accept that risk, which means that these aren't people who never intended to be parents. These are people who walked into a clinic and donated their sperm or their egg and did fundamentally make the choice to have their to become the biological parent of a child like somewhere out there. They talk about how there's this option of identity sharing in the US. I think I'll get to that more in their case because that's where they address that more. They talk about how like if we focus too much on the rights of the child, why not just like restructure our society as a whole? But once again, the reason that we urge you judges to look at this from the rights of the child is because in this grand scheme of things, in this entire scenario, the only person without any sort of autonomy or say over the circumstances of their life is the child, which is why in this case, since someone's rights are like explicitly being like neglected, we argue that that's the first place we need to start and the first people we need to consider to in this resolution. Flow through whatever else we said on the topic case. I think those were the 2 main things that my opponents had an issue with. Okay, onto the topic of children's rights. The first thing that they bring up, the first thing that we say is that like donor conceived individuals feel incomplete, alienated, confused by identities. They say that this ends up being worse than the AF because there's like no closure because the donor didn't want their information out there. Again, cross apply like the point that I bring up and the point that I bring up from the top case that A, this will only apply to future donors, not past donors who did not consent to their identity being shared, and B, again, we'd argue that if there's like a law that says, oh yeah, donors have to release their information, that the donor is going to walk into the clinic and know that, because once again, this isn't a one and done decision. This is a choice that someone I have a lot to get through. If I have time, I'll totally get to it. This is like an active choice that someone makes. I think I'll get more onto the instability point when I get to their case as well. On the medical history thing, the first thing that they try to bring up here is that doctors can already like help you with medical harms. The major problem here is that oftentimes when you go to a clinic, if you don't know your like medical history, like the entire like biological lineage of like one side of your family, you won't even be tested for certain things unless there is that warning sign that is already there, especially for like genetic defects, because obviously putting some person who's struggling from heart issues under like extensive genetic testing when they don't even know what their genetic background is isn't really plausible, which means oftentimes a lot of these genetic tests end up being related to like if you have like a family history warning in there, then they'll put you through the entire like genetic thing and see if there's anything wrong. So this doesn't really solve the problem here. Secondly, they talk about how like the uniqueness about like the sperm donor passing on deadly heart disease to like 9 out of 24 offspring didn't matter because one of them died at 2 and this is actually being found out later in life. Yeah, that was 1 out of the 9 that was given to. That means 8 of those children who could have known that there was this deadly heart genetic defect in their family ended up passing away like way later in life because they didn't know about their medical history. You also completely flow through the fact that 10% of oocyte egg donors run the risk of carrying unrecognized autosomal diseases, and also in much of the US, donors are not obliged to disclose potentially inheritable conditions, specifically like neurological issues that might just bypass the tests. That happens pretty often. Okay, on to their case. Where is this? First thing, donor rates going down. Biggest issue here. They tell you that like when donor anonymity gets removed, then these rates go down. They give you one example of this in the UK or whatever, but in the grand scheme of things, let's look at some statistics as to why this is like generally an untrue trend. So as we can see in the UK, early on, yeah, sure, there was a drop. There was a births using donor sperms and eggs increased. After the initial decrease, they increased from 1 in 450 in 2006 to 1 in 170
In 2019.
What's that? Okay, yeah. Okay, basically that means that at the end of the day, they actually they actually increased like rates of donor births. As we can see, like 1 kid in 450 kids in 2006 were born through donors, but 1 in 170 happened. This ended up like bouncing back in the grand scheme of things, and a small dip in the initial thing is definitely worth like increased donor rates and long things.
Passed in 2000.
Oh yeah, the law was passed in 2005. Okay, on to the, yeah, okay, let's move on. Secondly, they talk about there's this like fear of being tracked down and doing so, but again, a judge would argue that if like someone walks into a clinic and makes the choice to donate their egg knowing that their information is out there, that's actually going to lead to more educated donors who aren't just like in here for like a one and done, a quick buck, which is probably going to be a better thing in the grand scheme of things, because these donors are going to care more about like sharing their medical history, doing all of these things.
They don't have a legal right to actually.
Oh yeah, secondly, these donors aren't actually tied to the legal rights of being a parent, so they don't need to worry about like this level of pressure of like expecting money or any of that, because again, these people are not legally parents, they're just biologically parents. They talk about clinics in the Netherlands shutting down because of this. However, I'm looking up a statistic in regards to that in a second. Okay, cool. The second thing that's about all I have on there. So as we can see, since like, for example, in a place like the UK, the very example that they bring up, it becomes more accessible to people after this law happens than before. We'd argue that this ends up being a better thing in the long run. And the destroying families and disrupting families, through a couple of responses here. First off, studies show that children in egg donation family rates
Where it felt really close to their.
felt really close to their like mothers. When asked if they would change anything to be with their donor, they actually said no. This because again, these are like biological parents, not legal parents. They talk about how like if a kid wants a donor and a kid wants contact and a donor doesn't, that's gonna push like boundaries and it's gonna be bad. This is not a problem in the status quo. We see in a place like Germany where anonymity is completely removed. We see that if a donor wants no contact, in 80% of cases, the child is totally okay with that and doesn't even like ask to like find any sort of closure. For these reasons, I urge a strong ballot.
Alright, can I go DA1? Can I go app 19 first? But 2. I know. Alright, order's gonna be framing, neg, then app.
Oh yeah, my
I think we can interrupt it.
Yeah.
Fine with that.
I don't want.
Damn,
I fit the 4th and 5th one on the DA.
I got it. I'm beginning my first word. First, actually, one on the framing question. Insofar as affirmative concedes that you need donors to create the children in the first place, we are the internal link to creating any sort of the affirmation world. Insofar as you're going to be evaluating this and not just net benefits of the child, both net benefits of the child and donors, net benefits overall, we think that you should be excluding a key part of this factor, because if you kill all your donors, that's probably not under your definition of like child, like net benefits of the child, but insofar as that child will never be born, that probably means that the donor is the internal link and probably you should be considering them in this round. Just consider net benefits to all, because like there's a bunch of different parties involved, there's privacy concerns, and if donors aren't being the ones that are supplying, then there's a lot of other problems happening as well. So just net benefits to all is the mechanism you're flowing through. Alright, let's go to disadvantage 1. The overview on both the disadvantages is that largely the entire uniqueness code dropped, the entire links code dropped, the entire index code dropped. What can you extend very clearly? First, you can extend the status quo is solving in a place like the US. The US is meeting a lot, like it's meeting its entire demand in terms of people that like want these children. So, like for example, if there's an LGBTQ plus family that wants a child, they're usually getting that through ART or this reproductive system. On the second uniqueness point, you can extend that most people want like this, they use ART, and it's a very, very common thing. Okay, Now, what can you now on the UK warrant? First of all, we don't even need to win this UK warrant, but we say we do win it because even they say that like the donor rates bounced back, it still wasn't like what before when they banned it. So like let me explain. So in 2004, pre-2005, donor rates were really, really high. Then they banned it, donor rates went crashing down all the way, and then it's made some recovery since then, but it hasn't returned to the pre-2005 levels. This warrantation goes fundamentally dropped by side affirmation, yeah?
What are the pre-2005 levels?
I mean, the evidence we had said that like it dropped significantly from 2005 to now. That was the evidence that we read. But like, if you don't buy that, you can buy the Netherlands example, which they don't even contest, so that also just goes cleanly dropped. But like the UK example, what I'm telling you, just buy very cleanly here. Okay, honestly, you don't have to buy. Let's just go watch. Okay, the links. First, just extend the exit incentives. Just goes drop. 89.3% of people remained anonymous even when they were given the choice to not remain anonymous, which means clearly people want to remain anonymous. People don't want to be forced on the system. Secondly, here, effectively this fear being tracked down is a very real thing. They also don't respond to this fact in the sense that I'm going to get to on our second dissat. But even if they're not legally bound to the child, they're very morally bound to the child because it's your sperm after all. It's your kind of conceived child, and what kind of person would not help their quote unquote child that you have, like that literally you're like they're your child because there's whatever, like your sperm created them. So in that sense, you feel morally bound, maybe not legally bound, but that creates and complicates situations. Oh yeah, okay.
And with
Yeah.
cross-border reproductive.
Yeah.
Like what? Like does everyone have the same set of morals? Will every
Okay.
single person morally believe they're bound to their
Sure,
child?
like maybe not everyone has the same set of morals, but I'm pretty sure, like if, like at least for me, or at least I said, like a majority of people, if you were involved in the procreation of like another human being, and they actually came to you and found you, you probably now have developed an emotional tie to them. You probably buy this with some sort of high probability, insofar as like you make up half of their biological self. Then, if you don't want to buy that, extend the fourth link here on clinical shutdowns, because Netherlands had to close 3 of their major donor banks, and that thousands of children were not born as a result of these banks being closed. And it was so bad they had to repeal the policy, which tells you right now, and you can vote on this very cleanly, and we went on this empirics debate right here, that donors don't want to donate in a setting where their information is disclosed entirely. This is just dropped by side affirmation. Then fifth and finally, and even like most importantly here, when donors, like because they want to donate inevitably, and they like see like their local country is like enforcing all these mechanisms, they go to places like Georgia, where, for example, there's really, really little like consent protections, there's really, really little like quality of life in terms of like the healthcare, which means that these children that are being born are like usually very, very not only A, exploited, but B, their risk for heart conditions and genetic diseases are way more because it's much more lousier healthcare. Okay, yeah, I'll hit them. I take some, like I'll take them to the bottom if I can. On the impacts. First, extend mass infertility, which leads to a loss of meaning for life, which is greater than death itself. This is the highest terminal impact in the round. It's for, as you can see under net benefits, probably if death is one of the biggest impacts in the round. No meaning to life means that people have no reason to live, which means we as humanity exist in a state where we have no reason to live at all, which probably means this outweighs the entirety of the AFK. Second impact here is humanization. Humanization strips the human body. Yeah.
Sorry, could you just explain that argument?
Yeah, so insofar as like LGBTQ plus families and a lot of families, they want children, and the donors aren't, like there isn't enough donors, so there isn't enough children for these people to get their child, they lose meaning to life because they find value in having a family. Okay. Yeah, this just goes drops. You can just buy with 100% strength of link, and then dehumanization extend that. Okay, then disadvantage 2 about family here. Okay. I'll just read a general block here. In a 2023 Cambridge study found that of those who sought contact, the majority of those regretted it, nearly 60%. What does this tell you? Well, it tells you that hindsight decisions are incredibly like bad, because we see here that like, oh, a lot of these people that are like younger want like, or like when they just turned 18, they're like really curious. I'm like, oh, I want to meet my like actual sperm donor. I want to meet like the actual person, and they end up regretting it because guess what? Now they're tied to an actual family, a biological family. Now a person actually donated to them, and now there's a bunch of, it complicates a lot of family matter. We see this is probably pretty bad in the round insofar as it creates a lot of complications to the family dynamic and leads to people not actually feeling for a sense of life. We say that like donors are like as a result, this is just impact like less like are going to be like less going to like the donation facilities, and also you can just extend like all the links here on like how like it turns like this it turns this like private kind of there's a relationship between the hospital and the donor. That relationship is very private. What? Yeah. Like insofar as they conceive that like this medical foundation and trust is what builds up a lot of our confidence in the status quo, removing that trust means that people aren't actually like evaluating that, which means that less people are going to donate, less people are going to trust our healthcare, just overall just bad impacts. Okay, quickly on like a bunch of top of cases like the AF does in their speech. They say like, oh yeah, they say the child like is the only one that doesn't have consent. Big point here. We say here that even if the child is the only one that quote unquote doesn't technically have consent, the people that are giving their consent need to give consent, because guess what? If you give their information without their consent, they don't work. And if you buy in their world, if they were, for example, forced to give up their identity, no one would donate in the first place. So it's either it's just pick your scenario. Either nobody donates, or you have a world like either nobody donates, or you like or either nobody donates. Okay, I'm gonna add one about children's rights. This Crossfire Cambridge example here. They give you an example about the Article 7 about the UN. Xander makes a response, doesn't go drop. Like, why do we care about this? And also, they say that their only responses here are that this only applies to future donors. Correct. We're talking about future donors, which means that those who walk in are going to be less likely to sign and less likely to donate. This is our entire disadvantage one. We explain this whole link here. It means less people are going to donate. This is just an extension of our disadvantage here. That means less people are likely to donate. That's just the add one. On the add two here, they say, there's a bunch of heart disease and a bunch of heart problems. We solve this, and they don't even respond to this. The first way we solve this is through open release forms. Usually, most people that have genetically heart disease and heart conditions disclose it. But secondly, here of the medical condition that you don't know of, that's not unique in both worlds. Like you wouldn't know that either way.
They respond by saying that like you can't know it unless you have your full medical history.
They respond unless you don't know your full your name, your identity, everything. We say all you need to know is just the condition. And insofar as as we solve for the majority of cases, that probably means that literally that first of all, and also they have no impacts on this contention whatsoever.
You can't find the condition unless you know it can't biology.
Oh, they say you can't find the condition unless you know the whole family tree. Insofar as they concede that the majority of cases you just literally know, for example, my family has arthritis problems, then you usually disclose that when you're doing sperm donation. That is a standard procedure that happens all the time. And also, unrecognized procedures, this is probably not unique. They don't articulate how they solve. Even if they have their whole family tree, the medical industry and the surgeons are not going to be running a bunch of trials in it. And even then, the worst impact is death, and we outweigh death itself. So go next.
Starting off with framing non-voting issues and voting issues. Is anybody not ready?
Give me 1 second.
Yep.
I'm not ready.
Yep. Our time begins in 3, 2, 1. Extend everything Shauna tells you as to how you have to consider the parents of the child, since that child is only able to be created as a result of the parents, and therefore you look at net benefits to everybody. Where do you then start when you look at your flow? The government's going to come up here and basically tell you that the current healthcare system is inherently broken because you don't actually know the entire family tree of your parents. But insofar as side government fails to actually respond to my counter, which is you don't need to know the name of that person in order to be able to understand the medical conditions that you have, and the idea that people already solve for this because of these open release forms, which I'm not even sure that MG said open release forms or countered it in any way, we tell you with 100% certainty that this issue is being solved for quo. This, if not entirely, severely mitigates the impact, which is probably the only one that side government has access to, and means that the totality of their case is a very mitigated impact, which we will outweigh soon. The second thing they might bring up to you is this idea of this idea of how this emotional fraud that comes about within families. We tell you that you can look at this Cambridge study that Shauna tells you as to how when people actually get in contact with their donors, they then feel as they then regret it as a result. The only thing that they come back to is say when donors reach out to the kids, then people feel happy about it. But those are actually different things that they're talking about. We tell you that on the net, giving kids the ability to talk to their donor is a bad thing because of this Cambridge study. It's way more responsive, it's way ahead on the empirics debate. I doubt they will get to it. Then on the voting issues, the first thing that you can look at easily is this idea that the SQO solves, Judge. This is the easiest ballot that you can vote for side opposition. The why? The answers are threefold. Number one, we tell you the proliferation of open release forms, which has literally been dropped by the entire government case, ensures to you that there is going to be a system in which you can release these medical documents. Second, we tell you this idea that currently we have increasing medical abilities, which makes so that you can catch these things. And third, this idea that right now our current system is stable enough and we meet donor supply. To the extent that the Netherlands warrants get dropped and the United Kingdom warrants is probably a wash, we tell you we are way ahead on the empirics debate. The second voting issue that you can look at, which is even cleaner is this idea of clinic shutdowns, which the MG literally does not talk about. We give you this instance of the Georgia example, or sorry, no, not the Georgia thing. We give you the Netherlands thing here with this clinic shutdowns argument, and literally say that in the Netherlands they have to repeal the law, to the point that we get no pushback on this by with 100% certainty that we get access to our impacts on this first disadvantage, which tell you that you're going to see death and dehumanization, and like you're going to see LGBTQIA plus families feel incomplete and otherized. You can buy that because there's going to be these clinic shutdowns. Then the third thing that you can look at here is this idea of cross-border reproductive tourism. Again, just an easy ballot because it goes cold conceded. We tell you that as a result of this cross-border reproductive tourism, there's going to be an increases in exploitation of donors because there's not these there's no consent protection for these people. This is a massive problem because it leads to exploitation, which is the biggest impact in this debate round as it applies as it has the most magnitude. We also
biggest impact is no meeting when LGBT plus
Yeah.
aren't complete.
even then, the biggest impact is even if you don't want to look there, you can look at the second biggest impact, or the biggest impact, which is these LGBTQ plus families feel incomplete because they have no way or no mechanism in order to have kids, since the donor supply is so shocked as a result of having to have these forms. They say that these are actually good because then it creates a more informed donor base. But Chong tells you quite simply that is actually not the case. People are already very upfront with their medical history when they use these open release forms. You can buy, there's probably no difference within either world. Therefore, knowing the first and last name of your biological parent doesn't actually mean anything to your doctor. All they care about is your blood cells or what level that is. So then, Judge, what do you have to look at? You have to look at which impacts are the most. We tell you that the only impact that Gov remotely has access to is this extremely small impact on the idea of medical history, which we tell you is already solving it for itself in the status quo. But then we tell you that the only other thing that they look for is psychological stress. But they literally can see that this gets worse with this Cambridge study and the idea that it's only going to get that it's going to get even worse with other factors. For these reasons, you have to look at the effect of these clinic shutdowns and cross-border reproductive tourism, and the fact that LGBTQ plus families get otherized as a result of these policies, and the donor base shrinks, and I'm so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, this is going to be a 5-minute speech, PMR, wherever you're flowing this over at this on a new sheet of paper. It's going to be a summary of the entire debate. If everyone's ready, I'll begin on my next screen. Can you give me that once I get to it?
Yeah, for sure.
Judges, the key thing to understand is my opponent's fundamental mistake in their contentions that they fall into in their second speech. They fall into a double bind. Either only people who are consenting to sperm or egg release are the ones that donate and thus donor rates drop, or the app is somehow forcing people who don't want their information to be released without their consent to be egg or sperm donors, and leading to issues for them in the future because we're violating their trust in the government and this private relationship, and donor rates stay the same. We violate people who are not giving their consent, or donor rates drop. They can't go for both, and the only argument that's actually applicable under the resolution is that donor rates collapse, because the fact of the matter is that once that legal right is established, only people who are consenting are the ones that are going to be donating, which means no violation of privacy is going to be happening. Thus, drop their entire second contention. These two big impacts are their biggest two contentions. So the only thing we're going to knock out is donor collapse, and we'll get to that in a second. To reestablish, this house is, we said that we stand for this house as any country where egg or sperm donors are, where anonymity is not banned. This was conceded, flow that through, and framework, we don't really mind, net benefits is fine. Okay, the biggest reason you're going to be voting for us is going to be on medical history. Why exactly? This is going to be the biggest round and the biggest impact in the debate. They tell you we don't give you any impacts on this contention, but I clearly remember in when I was trying to scramble for things to say in my speech, I said it leads to a lower quality of life, can help reduce death. Why exactly? I think the basis of the medical history contention is fundamentally misunderstood by my opponents, and they really mishandled this. Let's talk about why. The only response they say to this is one, we solve for this through open release, and two, a doctor can. Sure, go ahead.
I guess it's sort of preemptive, but any response to open release forms was dropped by the MG and brought up in yellow.
My partner mentioned specifically that we're talking about conditions that may show up later in life. This is something we've been articulating since the first speech, and that's just, I'm only going to use things that are on the flip.
Okay, judge's discretion.
133, I'll continue. The second response they give is doctors can help you get healthy. Let's talk about why none of these arguments are going to actually destroy this contention, and this contention flows through. First, we feel mentioned from the very beginning that the only medical conditions that are the basis of this contention is medical conditions that develop later in life. Those conditions might not show up in your family history. Those conditions might not show up when you were a donor. The reason that those children should contact those people, the people that are their egg or sperm donors, is to figure out if they developed any medical conditions that showed up 18 years after they donated their egg or sperm, because again, we said it would be after their 18 years of age, which goes uncontested by my opponents. Again, like that type of thing cannot be preempted, so you flow through the impact that we're able to solve for like any conditions that may show up later, which helps improve quality of life and reduce death. But second of all, they say, oh, doctors can help you get healthy. We tell you like from the very beginning that like doctors are not like doctors or like this?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, because oftentimes you won't even be tested for stuff if you aren't previously predisposed to issues, which my partner clearly articulates. Not the many neurological issues that are typically remain unreported, not diseases that were found after donations, not like different, like not things that a doctor might catch on like very like much later. There are thousands of cases in the United States where you're unable to catch like a disease in its first state, but you know how you might be able to catch it if you figure out who your sperm or egg donor was, and maybe they developed that condition 5 years after they donated their egg or sperm, and you never found out because you never knew who your sperm or egg donor was. This leads to, again, solving for the impact of quality of life and death. Those are the only two responses over here. Like they say it's not unique in both worlds. It's just not. We're the only side that can solve for this. Take this as the biggest impact because, again, it is the only impact that deals with death. Death is irreversible and has the biggest magnitude of all because we tell you from the beginning that like around 10% of, yeah, around 10% of oocyte or egg donors run the risk of like carrying unrecognized autosomal disease. We tell you that like 9 out of 29 offspring born from sperm have like things like deadly heart genetics. Like this has a big like impact in our current society. They like drop most of this analysis. Let's move on to non-voters. Why don't you vote for them? In response to like, first of all, like donor collapse, like the Netherlands example isn't like the only reason to like vote us down on this. They say, oh, this example automatically means we win. That's just not true. We give you like 3 examples of countries where it was fine. We tell you UK, Sweden, and Norway, which is mentioned throughout all 3 speeches, but also specifically on like the UK warrant. Like we tell you, my partner like specifically tells you that like numbers, like sure they might have dropped a little bit for a while. It's not as steep of a drop. They tell you like they can't even tell you what the law rates were, but at the same time they like might have dropped for a little, but they bounced back higher than ever. They were 1 in 450 in 2006. The law was passed in 2005, and by 2070 that was 1 in 170. Like the countries are flourishing. If it was really that bad, a country like the United Kingdom, like Sweden, like Norway, they would have repealed the laws already, like the Netherlands did, but they didn't. So our examples, first of all, outweigh theirs. So donor collapse isn't going to happen. This like delinks all their impacts to like
Point of order. I
sure.
think this is I think this is a shadow extension from PhD.
What the
warrants about Norway and Sweden were not brought up in the MT. It's a shadow extension.
sure like
okay.
okay.
On
Like-
discretion.
Yeah, there's discretion.
Okay, 426. So like delink all their stuff on like LGBTQ dehumanization, donor rates don't fall. The next thing they like tell you is like cross-border reproductive tourism. Flow through the fact that my partner said, like flow through the thing that my partner said about transparency. If we turn this into a norm, then places like Georgia can no longer exploit donor rights and infringe on these issues. Like
Point
the
of order.
third point.
Sorry for calling so many point of orders.
It's
Yeah.
fine.
I think that any response to like the specific links on like this had one just got dropped in there. The cross-border stuff just doesn't get mentioned at all. It's signposted.
I think the fact I believe that I specifically brought up things like how this transparency can prevent donor exploitation, but sure, judge's discretion.
Okay, 443. I have no idea where I am. Okay, now I know where I am. Okay, cool. Okay, and like their final point is like on family disruption, which I think is like already a super small impact compared to like actual death from medical histories. But sure, like it's like not a problem because first of all, extend the framework point where we tell you that like children choose to find out who the donor is. Like it's not going to disrupt their family. Second, like that warrant where we see like most of them don't want to change their families. Third, it's not a problem we see in a place like Germany. We see that family disruption does not end up being an issue, and those people there end up coming to like a relation agreement. Around 80% of donors and offspring come to a no contact agreement with a second meeting if the donor wants to. Thank you.
Good round.
Good round, guys.
Yeah, Should we step aside?
If that makes sense.
I think about it.
That's it.
I'll chill.
You are.
We can still I'll be out that one second.
Okay.
Let me grab my bottle one sec. Yeah, it is.
Okay, bless.
Alrighty. Congratulations everybody for getting through the first day of NPDL-TOC. It is a 2-0 decision for the neg. I will go first. Good round, y'all. I ended up voting neg on donor collapse. The donor collapse data is clear to me. The status quo is stable. The current donor supply can meet all demand. The plan disrupts this through 1, incentive. Something like 89% on my flow of donors would prefer to be anonymous, and 2, legal liability. Donors don't want to be burdened by a moral attachment to a child. On the empirics debate, I err neg. The only empiric I have extended in the MG is the UK argument. I do not have the Norway and Sweden empirics on my flow, to be honest. There is some contestation about the UK warrant, and to be honest, I cannot look up the card and verify it for myself, so it's kind of a wash to me. I break the tie with the Netherlands empiric and the analytics. There are logical reasons why the app would collapse the donor market, plus it happened in the Netherlands, so I think there's a link. There are 2 impacts: cross-border tourism and children for LGBTQ families. I evaluate both of these. Being able to have children is explained to be the biggest impact in the round because being able to have children is what gives your life meaning in the first place and outweighs death. I think that some of this rhetoric might be a little bit questionable, to be honest. This is the type of language that has been used in the past to marginalize queer families that are not interested in assimilating into heteronormative family structures forwarded by the state. But this isn't an argument in the round, and I don't think that this is like objectionable, problematic rhetoric that would require intervention or anything. So don't try to
Sorry,
grab it.
will you explain that one more time?
Yeah, I'm just pointing out that the rhetoric of being able to have children is the biggest impact in the round because having kids is what gives your life meaning. That specific rhetorical tool has been used in the past to say that oh, gay couples who aren't interested in adopting children are therefore choosing to stay outside of society and choosing to be deviant and stuff, and was used as a justification for prosecuting queer couples that weren't interested in settling down and buying homes and stuff, specifically in the 80s and 90s. I'm not saying it's
I see. I
problematic.
don't think that's what they meant though.
Well,
Okay,
it's
sorry,
fine,
sorry.
fine, fine, fine.
Okay.
Yes,
I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, either way, this is the biggest impact and the neg wins it. Next, I go to the AF. I think there's sufficient defense to the medical history advantage that I feel comfortable dismissing it. First, I think that the impacts of this advantage are either solved by medical release forms or non-unique. Medical release forms allow the disclosure of any medical issues which are passed on to the child, which solves for the majority of medical diseases. The only diseases not solved for here are the ones that are discovered years after the child is born, which is non-unique. Anyone can discover a medical issue that they don't know about at any time in their life, and most of the time the medical system is able to handle this just fine. Maybe there is a small set of impacts where that 5 to 10 year head start of knowing that a parent has it is consequential, but it's significantly smaller due to the defense read by the negative. This plus the impact weighing means that I think the dissent outweighs, so I vote there.
Deadass, I got probably the exact same RFD. So yeah, I think I swear I'm not getting old, it's just my eyes are tired. Okay, yeah, I think ultimately the way I look at it, the app is kind of doing a little too late. I don't think the MG gets enough of the coverage of the neg, in addition to everything that June said, much more eloquently than I'll say. I don't think the MG gets enough of the coverage, gets enough coverage of the neg case, and I think the neg law does a sufficient job exploding this. I think the AF impacts are, I think, at least in the way I see it, relatively mitigated by the defense that the neg reads that I think are sufficient, and that open release forms do sufficiently reduce the amount of diseases that go unaccounted for. And yeah, I think I still equally weigh the impacts from kind of these queer families who are then able to apparently get this meaning of life or value out of their life from having children. Again, ditto on what June said about how that rhetoric has historical issues, but again, I don't think it's objectionable or necessarily outwardly problematic in this round. And I also, I think for the impacts of reproductive tourism and exploitation related to that, as well as potential health issues related to that, I think there's probably a world in which the neg spends 10 more seconds saying that the necessarily the medical issues that come out of kind of these reproductive tourist children conceived out of these reproductive tourist kind of missions probably can be weighed against the medical impacts of the people who don't get to know about like diseases because of like a lack of open release or a lack of kind of disclosure, probably doesn't really matter by the time I'm looking at this round, but you know, just putting it out there. I think I vaguely have articulation that like these the practices of the app exist in like Sweden and Norway and Germany that come out of the PMC, but I don't hear it at all in the MGU, which means it's a shadow extension in the PMR, and I don't really grant this. Yeah, cool. Besides that, everything that June said, I vote essentially the same way. Great round, y'all. Excited to see where the rest of this tournament takes y'all. Yeah, good luck. Have fun.
Thank you.
And
Thank
get
you
the
so much.
rest.
Thank you. Sorry about any of the.
Oh, it's okay.
No, you're totally good.
Good debate.
Good on, guys.
Is this that one?
I'm
for
gonna get
Spectres?
tacos in Alexander, and you're
Oh,
not.
that's
Oh, yeah. That's that bummer.
Yeah, take it.
That's that
Or
thing
take
where
the
you lose